Joining me now is Joshua Ritter, former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, and the host of the True Crime Daily Sidebar Podcast. This happened pretty quickly this morning. It sounded as though a change of tune from his new attorney. He's now en route to New York. What can we expect on this extradition process and what he'll face now as he lands in New York moments from now?
Not too shocking that he was willing to waive extradition. Extradition is usually a matter of paperwork, and it was kind of a delay tactic for him to challenge it in the first place. But now that he goes back to New York, he's going to, face the more serious charges of first-degree murder. It's interesting in New York, what we would usually consider an intentional homicide as a first-degree murder is second-degree murder in New York. And it's only with these aggravating factors, and in this case, in the furtherance of terrorism, that it would rise to the level of first-degree murder. So that's what he's going to be facing when he arrives back in New York. He'll be arraigned likely today, most likely tomorrow.
Well, we all observed that he was clean-shaven, his hair had been cut, his eyebrows looked like they'd been groomed as well. Is that something that the attorney would request, and how might that process go before his court appearance today?
Yeah, I think it was probably something that the attorneys requested. I mean, this is a case where he's going to be seen on television. I imagine at every single appearance that he makes. He was a little unkempt looking the last time that we saw him soon after his arrest. So not entirely out of the ordinary. And there are, facilities for that in jail to have him cleaned up a little bit.
Let's talk about the charges that he faces. How much more does it bolster the prosecution's case with this terrorism charge, or does that complicate things?
Both. It complicates things in that they have to prove these additional elements that this was done in the furtherance of terrorism, meaning that it was done to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or that it was done to influence the policy of a unit of government. And you can tell by just that language used in their statute, there's going to be more involved for the prosecutors to prove that this was actually an act of terrorism. But in doing so, by making it a first-degree murder, his exposure now turns into life. So it's certainly a big jump from second-degree murder to first-degree murder, and I think the more appropriate charge in this case.
There's been a lot of evidence that's been made public. All came out during the manhunt before his arrest. How do you expect his defense team to argue against what we've seen so far?
Everything about this, to me, from the way that it was planned, from his conduct before and even after his arrest, seems to be lining up for some sort of mental health defense. I would think that in the hands of most attorneys, that is what they would be looking to have him evaluated and say that this is a man who was living an otherwise law-abiding life and he just simply snapped. But knowing what we know about Mangione and his behavior and this kind of message that he wants to proselytize, I don't know if he'll agree to that. He has to sign off on that kind of a defense. So we may see a full-throated defense where he's just saying that he wasn't involved, or even perhaps something as bizarre as him taking responsibility and, completing his martyrdom and accepting that he was the one responsible for this because of that cause that he's promoting.
How soon do you think we'll know which way the defense will play this, the insanity defense or otherwise?
I think it'll probably be some time. I mean, right now, it's likely that they haven't even received the lion's share of the discovery in this case. It's going to be voluminous. They're going to need a lot of time to go through that. There's probably going to be several more hearings before we get down to any kind of evidentiary proceedings in court where we might understand or have some revelations as to what they're actually going to argue at trial.
Let's say they do go with an insanity defense. How does the prosecution prepare for that?
I think they should. Listen, you can have some crazy ideas and you can have some wild theories as far as healthcare and insurance goes, but this was premeditated. This was planned. This is a person who has all his faculties about him. He understood the consequences of his actions, and that's what really an insanity defense comes down to. It's going to be a difficult defense if it is mounted by his team, but I think just given the evidence, the state of it that we're seeing and what we've heard so far, I don't know what else they are really left with because it's a strong case for the prosecution.
Nobody said prison was going to be fun, but of all of them, you hear a lot about Rikers. What should he expect when heading to that facility?
It's rough. It's a rough place to be. It is a jail facility, meaning it's not state prison, so it's where people are housed waiting for their trials to be heard. And so you run the gamut of very, very violent offenders down to people who've just committed, misdemeanor type crimes, all being housed together in facilities that are kind of notoriously poor. So it is not going to be a fun time for him while his trial is waiting to be heard.
His case is catching a lot of attention, Josh, and it has really since the start because of the nature of the crime. But one thing we haven't heard is whether or not he acted alone or if there were any other outside influences. Do you think that door has closed?
I don't know if it's closed, but it's interesting because the investigators have been fairly forthcoming with their information. They've shared a lot with the public about how this investigation unfolded and the evidence that they have against him. And there's been no indication so far that he was working with anyone else. It does seem as though this was him alone acting. Now, whether or not his defense might try to bring in some evidence of that or try to place the blame at the feet of other people, time will tell. But as things stand right now, it looks like it's just going to be the state of New York versus Mr. Mangione.
Right. And he should be arriving in New York at any time now. Within the last hour or so, he got on a plane. So we've got our team standing by and ready. Attorney Joshua Ritter, thank you as always. Appreciate the legal perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.